Hello everyone, and welcome back to the continued reading of the puzzle, A Gift from Spirit with Kelly Allen. And today I'm going to be reading from the chapter, Our Divine Agreement with Spirit. This is another chapter where I reflect back now on, after the experience that I had with medicine ceremony, and I'll put a link to that below. And I reflect back when I'm reading this chapter, and it's amazing how much more this makes sense to me now, even more so now than ever. So I hope you enjoy it, and as always, I'll start off with reading of a couple quotes and then jump right into the chapter. Adversity introduces a man to his higher self. Author unknown. All the adversity I've had in my life, all my troubles and obstacles have strengthened me. You may not realize it when it happens, but a kick in the teeth may be the best thing in the world for you. Walt Disney. Our Divine Agreement with Spirit. As I consider my life and the many, quote, tragedies I've encountered and experienced, I often say it's a good thing I didn't know what I was getting into. Otherwise, I probably would have backed out and never come. As many times as I vocally and silently spoke these words throughout my life, it wasn't until well into my adult life that I considered the actual meaning behind this statement and the irony the words contained. Earlier in this book, in the chapter called To Remember, I shared my experience of being taken as a child to a place of peace and comfort by Spirit that has continued to comfort me throughout my life. It wasn't until more recently in life I came to understand that it was a reminder of who I am and the agreement I made before allowing a veil to drop, so that I could experience in fullness as a being growing and evolving in this earthly existence. I've often heard others also say that they would never have agreed to some of the conditions they have been subjected to in this life. However, I've heard the same come to say that they have no regrets, that they would not change a thing, and that their life experiences have made them the person they have become and love. I know for me personally, once I got over the blame game and I moved past choosing to be a victim, I too came to the conclusion that I would not change a thing. I have no regrets, and I now love me. However, it was not always the case that I embraced myself, my life, and my unique experiences as a spark of divine. As I now look back on my life, I recall the many challenges I faced as a young man coming to terms with my sexual orientation. In my home growing up, in my neighborhood, in school, and on television, it was made apparent that being a homosexual was something looked down upon, to be made fun of and considered, quote, bad. Growing up, I was able to convince the world, myself included, that this was something I did not identify with. Because I didn't possess feminine qualities, I was never suspect, and at times while growing up in my teens, I even participated in off-color jokes about gays and fellow ribbing with friends. I will say, though, that I never did partake in making fun of obviously gay individuals, and would, on the contrary, defend such individuals. It wasn't until later in life, after having left the fanatical fundamentalist church that I belonged to, that I began to acknowledge my sexual orientation and the fact that I was a homosexual. At the age of 22, I took my annual Christmas Eve trip to the Oceanside Harbor to sit and watch the ocean waves crash against the beach and enjoy the peace and tranquility of God's creation alone. On this particular night, while sitting and contemplating my inevitable judgment and doom as a reprobate of the church that I had left, I struggled with the bitterness that I had permitted to consume me. I was bitter about my childhood, my upbringing, and the dysfunction that I had been delivered into, and now I was bitter against God and the disappointment I now felt concerning the church I believed to have held the ultimate truth. My foundations were shaken, and I felt I was left with nothing to hold me together. As I sat on the beach in contemplation, I began to consider an option that I had already failed at once. I began to once again consider checking out. Before I continue sharing the rest of my Christmas Eve experience, let me share with you another experience in my life that affirmed to me that I indeed had a purpose to fulfill in this life, as I now believe we all do. Earlier that year, again after having removed myself from the church that I passionately clung to, I was at a place of employment, diligently working to impress the boss as always. Only this day was different in that something had come over me. For several days, I gradually slipped into a place of severe depression. I can't say exactly what came over me or why I had spiraled so deep. There have been very few times in life that I've felt so much despair in my heart and such a strong desire to end my life. For a couple of days, I carried a baggie full of painkillers I had obtained from a newly found friend to, quote, help me with my depression. For some reason, on this particular day, I decided to take a pill at work. On the first break, I took one pill. After a while, I decided to take another. But upon entering the bathroom, I decided to take 2 more instead. Rather than numb the pain, the pills only seemed to enhance my emotions and my desire to remove myself from this place of suffering. By lunchtime, I had made the decision to take the rest of the pills, approximately 12 pills more, and then go lie in the neighboring park and wait for peace to consume me in final rest. I was ready to be free of pain, the pain of living. Apparently, God had other plans. From the time I made my way to the park in what must have looked like a drunken stupor, I don't remember much else. I have vague memories of being on the San Diego freeway in a friend's truck, and then I have memories of waking up covered in vomit and urine at my friend's house, and having him tending to me and cleaning me up. The moments of consciousness came and went until I was finally strong enough to get out of bed and walk to the upstairs landing, where I looked down into my friend's living room and saw him and his brother watching television. It was at this point that my friend, Jeff Reish, filled me in on what had happened. To this day, I cannot say how Jeff was able to receive a phone call from me, but apparently he did. First and foremost, there are no phones or phone booths in the park, and this was before cell phones were a commonality. Additionally, I didn't have Jeff's number memorized, and I didn't have my address book with me at work. However, Jeff informed me that he received a phone call from me telling him that I was in a particular park and I was in trouble. He and his brother drove out to the park to find me overdosed and lying in the grass. Jeff also informed me that when he and his brother mentioned in the truck that they were taking me to the hospital, I opened the passenger door to the truck and attempted to jump out in moving traffic on the freeway. Fortunately, Jeff's brother caught me by the back of my shirt and pulled me back in the truck. I somehow convinced them not to take me to the hospital, and they instead took me to their house in Encinitas, where Jeff cared for me for 3 days before I was able to gain consciousness to the point of communicating. I remained there for an additional day before I was well enough to be taken to my car and capable of returning to work and pleading for my job back. Of course, I attributed the absence to severe illness, and I definitely looked the part. Over the next few years, Jeff and I gradually lost touch, and I've been on a lifelong search to reacquaint with him and thank him for saving my life. To this day, I still can't explain how he received a phone call from me. I also don't know how Jeff's brother was able to react quickly enough to keep me from jumping out of the truck. I do know that I'm grateful. Now, returning back to the night of Christmas Eve when I was 22, I had once again begun sinking into a state of depression like that described in the previous experience. I was contemplating ways in which I could attempt to end my life once again. I had alcohol with me and I was drinking to numb the pain. I had come to believe that religion, and therefore spirituality as well, was a sham, and the closest people to me were the members of the church to which I had now turned my back. The only other people I knew were the people I worked with, and I had long ago distanced them from me with my sermons and attempts to proselytize them. Other than that, I had reacquainted myself with a few so-called friends from the past who were more interested in selling me drugs than being my friend. The saying, misery loves company, was about to show itself in a huge way at this time in my life. While I sat and pondered the way in which I would guarantee success in my departure from this world, I was suddenly approached by a group of individuals walking down the beach. By the clothing they wore, I could tell that they were obviously fans of punk music, something I enjoyed a great deal before my conversion in the fanatical church I joined while in high school. They asked if they could sit and visit with me. I had acquired an abandoned bonfire, which is somewhat rare even in California on Christmas Eve. My first instinct was to tell them where to go, so they would leave me to wallow in my self-pity and misery, but something came over me, and I decided to let them stay. We all sat and shared our individual stories as to why Christmas was, quote, bogus, and why each of us, rather than being with our families, had chosen to spend Christmas Eve on the beach. Before long, we had bonded over our collective misery, and I realized I wasn't as alone in the world as I thought. Before leaving for the night, this group invited me to join them the following week at a club in San Diego. Without putting thought into an answer and without questions, I agreed. Not only had I elected to stick around for a while, I had now made a commitment to which I must honor. I had just made a date that would put me face to face with myself, one that would send me in a new direction and on my journey of self-discovery. The following weekend, I arrived at the bar in San Diego. It was actually more of a dance club than a bar, and it was obviously a very progressive club. Upon entering the bar, I realized that this was not a typical club. Most everyone in the club wore black, and the clothing ranged from mod-style attire to gothic to punk. What surprised me a bit was the sprinkling of men dressed as women. Having grown up with an affinity of punk music as well as a variety of other fringe music, and having been to numerous concerts at an early age, I wasn't completely out of touch. However, I had never been to a club that was open to gay and transgender people, and I had just waltzed in without a clue. Fortunately, my friends from the beach spotted me, and they saved me from myself right away. They had a laugh at my expense. It seems my initial discomfort was pretty apparent. At one point in the evening, I actually had what I would now call a panic attack. As I met and interacted with this very diverse group, I found that they were, for the most part, extremely welcoming and friendly to me. It suddenly struck me that I was comfortable in what I would have called in my recent past a den of iniquity. Had I actually been turned over to a reprobate mind? Did I just cross the line to guarantee the loss of my eternal salvation? Or was it something even more real? Had I just realized that I was at home with fringe people, including gay people, and was I allowing myself to now identify with a part of myself I had buried deep beneath shame, guilt, and most of all, fear? Eventually, I found myself meeting more and more people and developing friendships. It wasn't long before I was asked out by guys who were interested in me. For quite a while, I resisted the urge to, quote, flirt with disaster, still affected, or should I say infected, with the programming and the deep down belief that to be a homosexual was wrong, that it was a stench in the nostrils of God. It took quite some time before I eventually came to terms with my attraction to men and ultimately came out. I first came out to other gay friends, I eventually came out at work, and I ultimately came out to my family. I was finally ready, however, unfortunately, society as a whole was not, and I took several beatings for it. Through the years, I have been the recipient of what are now known as hate crimes. One year, while in my early 20s, I was at a mall with a friend. My friend happened to be feminine and a bit flamboyant in nature. We were approached by two men who called us faggots. One shoved me, and in response, I punched him. My temper was greater in those days. Fortunately, security witnessed the event, and they escorted the two men who started the altercation out of the mall. Unfortunately, the two men called two friends and waited outside for us. When we left the mall and headed to our car, 3 of the 4 guys jumped me while the other guy chased my friend. He was able to escape, however, I was not so lucky. By the time they finished with me, I was bleeding from so many places I couldn't tell where the actual injuries were that I sustained. My ear was bleeding, my nose was bleeding, my mouth was bleeding, and I would later come to realize that even my kidneys were bleeding. It took me weeks to recover. On another occasion, my partner and I were at a party for a friend who was graduating from cosmetology school. Word had gotten out at the party that my partner and I were a couple, and a group of guys at the party decided that we needed to be beaten up for it. They blocked our car in so that we couldn't leave, and when we went to go to our car, they jumped us. We took an incredible beating, and I was even knocked out by a blow to my head with a lead pipe. These guys seemed to want to kill us. I could give several other examples of situations in which I could say that I, quote, suffered for my sexual orientation, and I could revel in the fact that I've been victimized in life. However, I choose to be grateful for each and every one of my experiences in life, and for being born gay. Perhaps it wasn't necessary to have been the recipient of such terrible abuse, but perhaps I attracted these situations to myself by putting so much attention on the belief that homosexuality was an abomination to God, and perhaps I had attracted these experiences because of the incredible fear I harnessed in regard to it. I do ask myself this question though. If I hadn't been born gay, Would I have been able to move past fundamentalism and spiritually evolve? If I had not been born gay, would I have instead allowed myself to unjustly judge those who were? Could it be that I made an agreement with the divine to come into this lifetime as a gay man to help me grow and evolve spiritually? In the Bible, in the book of Matthew, chapter 4, Jesus was offered the wealth of the world by the devil if he would just bow down and worship him. However, he had his mission, his agreement with God, or the universe. Jesus provides an outstanding example of honoring his previously arranged commitment with Spirit. In Matthew chapter 26, the story is recounted of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, in which Jesus prays fervently, and with heaviness he asks Spirit to, quote, "let this cup pass from me," signifying the agreement that he had made with God. Of course, we all know that he goes on to say, "Nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt." As we can see, Jesus chose to honor his commitment, and he chose to serve the higher purpose of denying the will of his form or ego and allowing the greater purpose of Spirit to be served. Does this mean that we must all suffer as Christ did? I don't believe so. But I do believe it's possible that prior to entering this physical plane of existence, we may have made our cosmic or divine agreements for the purpose of experience that leads to spiritual growth and evolution. I also believe that ultimately, through our experiences, we will understand the love of God expressed in and through us, as we can live with meaning, with purpose, and with joy.